Hello and welcome to the Go Diabetes webinar on diabetes nutrition counseling, methods to increase effectiveness. Our faculty today is calling all the way from California. Cheryl Rosenberg-Suen has a Master's of Public Health in Public Health Nutrition. She's also a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator. She is currently working with the Northridge Family Practice Residency Program and the Glendale Family Practice Residency Program as a lecturer and a clinical instructor in nutrition. Additionally, she is the medical nutrition therapy provider with the Northridge Medical Group. We'd like to welcome her today and welcome all of our attendees. Please note that your phones will be muted upon entry, and we will be having a question and answer period after her presentation. You may use the chat function on WebEx to your right there to send any questions, and we'll respond to those at the end of her presentation. As in the past, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Go Diabetes website in about a week, so that if you have individuals that you'd like to share this important message with, you may direct them to our website and they may view this presentation at their convenience. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and turn over the presentation to Cheryl, and she is going to get started with her interesting and very practical presentation on methods to increase effectiveness with diabetes nutrition counseling. Cheryl, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Susan. As you spoke, I'm going to be speaking about diabetes nutrition counseling, and particularly about type 2 diabetes and methods to increase effectiveness in counseling. This slide, you can see in the center, three main clinical goals that we want to achieve with medical nutrition therapy. That's to optimize blood glucose control, improve blood lipids, and control blood pressure. In order to achieve these three goals, there's 6 areas that need to be tackled. The first area would be consistent carbohydrate intake. Also, we're working at helping the patient to modify fat, particularly saturated fat, and control caloric content. Evenly spaced meals are important to keep blood glucose controlled and in a safe zone. Encouraging the patient to increase physical activity that helps to improve insulin sensitivity as well as promote a healthy body weight, which brings us to moderate weight loss. Actually, only a 7 to 10% weight loss can be significant enough to achieve a change in glucose control. And that is very good to hear for patients who need to lose perhaps 100 pounds to get to a optimal body weight, but yet just losing 7 to 10% of their body weight might be sufficient to help bring about blood glucose into better control. And then monitor blood glucose to adjust therapy. We want patients to learn how to monitor their blood glucose. That gives them an idea about how their diet is working or what possible medications they might need to begin or to change. So when you see this, you can understand that there's a great deal of information to cover. And this little cartoon kind of shows the scenario that clinicians experience. You can see the little doctor saying, I want you to test your sugars every day. Stop eating so much bread and pasta. Stop drinking juice and sodas. Take your medications twice daily. Record your blood sugars and food intake daily. And stop eating those donuts. And then the patient goes home. His wife says, so what did the doctor say? And the patient goes, I don't know. I stopped listening. This unfortunately is a fairly realistic scenario that happens because perhaps there's so much information to cover that a clinician tries to squeeze a lot into a short amount of time. Or often just doesn't provide this information at a visit because there's other things to do at the medical visit, and the nutrition counseling component appears so overwhelming. So it creates this frustration, and this frustration is really part of a cycle of frustration, starting with the patient being given an overwhelming or very vague goal. Follow your diet. That's a pretty vague goal. Often patients don't know really what that entails, what that means. Or they might interpret it as something that is so difficult and far from the foods that they enjoy that they just give up and figure, well, I'd rather go with quality of life than quantity of life. The patient might begin to feel like a failure if their diabetes is not controlled, feeling that they just have no effect on this and become depressed. And the healthcare provider becomes frustrated as well. We often blame the patient. So they just don't care about their health. Why do they continue to drink Pepsis when they know that it affects their blood sugar? So the cycle just continues. What I want to do today is help you promote more success with your efforts at doing some diabetes diet therapy to have better outcomes and to try to break this cycle of frustration. So what we're going to talk about now is what the family doctor can do. And I want to start by having you think about your world of food and your patient's world of food. When I say world of food, I'm talking about all the who, what, where, and why of our eating. If you think about it, all of us have a sort of a cycle menu, right? When you probably have 2 to 3 different breakfasts in a week, and you cycle through them. Perhaps you have a little more variety at lunch, maybe 3 to 4 different lunches, 9 different dinners. When you go out for pizza with your friends, there's probably 1 or 2 toppings that you always like to get. When you get Chinese takeout, there's maybe 2 or 3 dishes that are your favorites, and everyone's a little bit different. It all depends on, and what we need to be concerned about, of course, would be if there's unhealthful foods in this cycle menu. We would just try to encourage the patient to change the frequency of that particular meal appearing in the cycle. If you know that your cholesterol is high and you need to reduce saturated fat, and you love cheeseburgers, and you have cheeseburgers, maybe cheeseburger 2 or 3 times a week, well, that's much too frequent in your menu cycle for your particular health needs. But if you had a cheeseburger perhaps once or twice a month, now you're talking 1 or 2 meals out of 84. That's not the same type of concern. So in order to learn about your patient's world of food, there's key questions that clinicians can ask their patient. And let's go through them. What foods do you try to limit because of diabetes? I think that's an important question to ask your patients. You get an idea whether they do any type of limitation or how their thinking goes in terms of what foods would be okay for them or what foods might be problematic. How many people in your household? When you learn about whether the patient lives alone or they're married or they have roommates, that gives you an idea of other possibilities that are going on in terms of their food intake. Perhaps a little sabotage occurs when a spouse doesn't want to see the other spouse lose weight, or I call it being partners in food crime, enjoying having snacks on the sofa together, watching television in the evening, which might not be problematic for the non-diabetic partner, but can be problematic for the diabetic partner. I like to ask patients, what did you eat so far this morning? Gives you an idea whether they eat breakfast or sometimes you might find that the patient that you're seeing is actually working a graveyard shift, and so their morning meal is their dinner, and then they're going to be going to bed shortly after. How often do you eat breakfast or not eat breakfast? What's in your refrigerator right now? I think that's a great question. When I ask that to residents here, I usually find that there's not very much in the refrigerator at all. If you ask your patient about a snapshot of what's in the refrigerator, you get a good idea about their world of food. How often do you go grocery shopping? Somebody who shops once a month probably does not have a lot of fresh produce or fresh milk in the household. It probably is consuming a lot of canned goods, maybe a higher sodium intake, maybe more pre-prepared foods that they just microwave. How often do you eat a home-prepared dinner? Good question. Where are you when you're eating? At the table, watching television, at the computer, in your car? And what do you drink with meals? What do you drink when you're thirsty? I think this is a very important question because so many times we find that our patients are drinking large quantities of caloric beverages, of sodas or juices or high C or Kool-Aid, frappuccinos, smoothies, and many patients don't equate drinking, for example, juice or smoothies as something that would actually be unhealthful for diabetes. Yet I explain to patients, when you drink a soda or a large juice, it's similar to having an IV glucose drip going in your veins and makes controlling your blood sugar extremely challenging. What restaurants do you go to? How often do you go to those restaurants? And what do you order at, McDonald's or Subway or the coffee shop? So now that you've asked these questions, you're starting to get a picture of some of the factors that perhaps drive your patient's food choices. It's a good idea to gather a concept of what these factors are because you can use this to be more effective in nutrition counseling. For example, taste. Taste is ultimately why people eat the foods they do. If we didn't, even if something we know is good for us, but it tastes terrible, you probably are not going to give it another chance. Tradition. We grew up with certain traditions, different cultures across the United States. If you talk to your patients, you might find that for one to define having dinner, that dinner has to have rice, or the dinner needs to have meat, or that dinner needs to be hot as opposed to cold. And incorporating these factors and incorporating these traditions into a diabetes food plan will just help to increase success. Time is another factor that, of course, drives our food choices. If you have limited time, you're probably going to have some sort of fast food meal or quickly microwaving something. If you have more time, perhaps you're going to be able to have more fresh vegetables and eat more slowly. All of this affects our health and affects glucose control for patients with diabetes. Money definitely is a major factor that drives patient food choices. When you think about people who are on a budget, what foods are more inexpensive tends to be starchy foods, tends to be meal stretchers. You can stretch out a meal for a family, food for a family, if you're including rice or potatoes or pasta, and then limiting the more expensive food, which would be the meat or the fish or the protein entree. And so these budget stretchers are also carbohydrate sources and can contribute to higher levels of blood glucose. Availability of food, one's cooking skills, health medical concerns, these are all factors that affect patients' food choices, our own food choices. And if you look at these factors that I've listed right here, and you do a survey to see what tends to be the most important for most people, taste is number one. And what would you guess would be the least important factor of why people choose the food they do? You're right, health medical concerns. And so it's quite a challenge as a nutrition specialist to encourage patients, to convince them that healthy foods can also taste delicious. And that is the challenge. What is your patient's eating style? That's all part of gathering the information about your patient's world of food. Their eating style. There's various eating styles. Some people are very structured eaters. Always have breakfast, about 5 hours later lunch, 5 hours later dinner. Some people commonly skip meals, perhaps just eat one large meal a day. Others are high-speed eaters, kind of wolfing down when they get a chance and eating very quickly. Now, what would any of these, why would this be important to know what your patient's eating style is? Well, if you are trying to control blood sugars and you skip meals, or perhaps took your glyburide in the morning and then didn't eat breakfast or lunch, that's going to link to having a hypoglycemic experience probably somewhere mid-morning or in the afternoon. High-speed eaters, they often overeat. It takes a certain amount of time, a lag time from one's stomach and intestine to the brain to have this feedback signal that, yes, I'm experiencing satiety, I can slow down, I don't need to eat as much. You might find there's times that when you ate a large quantity at a party or a buffet, and then about 10 minutes later you feel so full you can't believe that you ate that much. There's about a 10-15 minute lag time to feel satiety from that particular meal. In fact, you can encourage patients to wait before they have a second helping of some food. Just wait, look at their watch and wait 10 minutes, and odds are they will not want that second helping when they let a little bit of time pass. That is much more positive and effective than patients berating themselves saying, I don't need to eat anymore, I'm fat, I got to lose this weight, and I don't need to eat more, but yet, I'm hungry, and then they go on and need to kind of comfort themselves with that food after berating themselves and making themselves feeling bad. It kind of leads to more emotional comfort eating. Distracted eaters. I think as a nation we are distracted eaters. We're usually multitasking, doing many things when we eat. You see this picture here of a child sitting on a sofa munching on some sort of snack chips while watching television. The residency programs, they encourage distracted eating when residents and students at lunchtime are usually eating their meal while participating in a noon conference. So in other parts of the world, workers have a 2-hour lunch break where it's expected that you go home and enjoy a home-cooked meal. But for the most part here in the United States, there's a 30-minute lunch break with perhaps 2 15-minute breaks at other times in the day. And this further promotes this fast speed distracted eating. What's the answer to changing this? Trying to become a focused eater, perhaps turning off the television set, sitting at a table, trying to pay attention when you're eating. Because if you're sitting and paying attention, you can note your enjoyment of that particular meal. You're looking at the colors, experiencing the textures, and perhaps will be happy, satisfied, and content with less total food. We have erratic eaters, recreational eating, and, of course, emotional comfort eating. Another part of gathering information about that patient's world of food is looking at their diet history, or asking some questions about what they ate in the particular day, or if they keep a food diary for you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about interpreting what patients actually say, because as I've been doing this for over 20 years, actually more, but I don't want to let you make claim to how long I've been actually working at this. But what patients will say to me, ask, okay, what did you eat so far today? Oh, I had cereal. And then, is that it in cereal? Yeah. And then at work, do you have anything to eat at work? I get coffee. You know, as I go through the day, I had a burrito, and then I go home and I cook some sort of chicken or meat with some rice, and at night I might have a dish of ice cream. Okay, well, it doesn't look too outrageous. Doesn't look like that much food, perhaps, or not necessarily. Maybe the ice cream might be an issue with some of the carbohydrate. But as we probe a little more and find out what that patient really means, when they say cereal, they're talking a fairly large bowl of cornflakes, maybe 2.5 cups of cornflakes in the bowl, non-fat milk and banana. Even that doesn't seem like a very unhealthful breakfast to most people. But if you start looking at what these meals mean in terms of carbohydrate grams, now we got a different picture. We can see that a bowl of cornflakes, non-fat milk, and a banana can actually provide over 100 grams of carbohydrate at a meal. The coffee also included a muffin or a scone. That could be up to 80 grams of carbohydrate with that coffee break. Burrito depends. Is it a burrito from a vending machine made with a very small flour tortilla and a little bit of rice and beans in it? Or is it a burrito from a good Mexican restaurant where the tortilla that you start out with is the size of a small tabletop? Picture ironing out about 4 slices of Wonder Bread to make that tortilla, and then wrapping a scoop of rice and beans and chicken around that. You've got a good 110, even maybe 150 grams of carbohydrate in the burrito. And then if that's washed down with a large soda, that could be another 72 grams. If one's getting a refill, that would be 150 grams or so, just from the soda alone. And curious, I find that a lot of patients, when in doing diet histories, they don't equate clear sodas like Sprite, 7-Up, as being a source of sugar or a problem. They see cola beverages as being unhealthful, but they often view clear sodas as being almost like water. Not sure why, but that seems to be the case more often than you'd believe. Then the 9 o'clock meal, beef stew, meat and rice. It could be 3 cups of rice. 1 cup of rice is 45 grams of carbohydrate. So 3 cups of rice is now really adding up. So getting an idea of what your patient says, what they really mean, and what the carbohydrate ramifications are is very important to being able to learn about that patient's world of food and then being able to help them. So let's now move towards intervention. How do you help this patient make change? I like to talk about the 5-minute nutrition counseling session. In a 5-minute nutrition counseling session, you can only cover a certain amount of information, but yet clinicians can be very effective if they know what to cover, how to do it. You need to differentiate between need to know and nice to know information. You need to use visual images. A picture is worth 1,000 words and will save you a lot of time to make learning memorable. Have your patients participate in the learning. And time for reflection and evaluation, so you can actually determine whether your patient understood what you said and maybe help correct and shape what they're going to do. So this is a 5-minute nutrition counseling session, and we're going to talk about some of those different points. Let's start talking about need to know diabetes nutrition information. What is need to know? A patient needs to know, when they leave your exam room, they need to know which of their customary foods are actually causing their blood sugars to rise. What are these problematic foods that they are eating? And where can they make change? Not just from a list that clinicians often provide But actually looking at that patient's diet history, what can you identify from that you can quickly help that patient? If you found out that they're drinking a big gulp beverages from the 7-Eleven across the street in the afternoon because their office is not air conditioned and they get so hot, and by learning that that's going on, that will be a key way for you to help control their blood sugars, where prior to that you might have thought that they just need more medication. But actually, by not having 140 grams of simple absorbable carbohydrate in the afternoon, their blood sugars can come under great control. So that would be an example of need-to-know information. Or what can they eat when they're at work? What should they drink instead of fruit drinks? These are examples of need-to-know. Nice to know. Nice to know diabetes nutrition information. There's loads of that. There's a lot of things to cover, but not in a 5-minute session. Some of this nice-to-know information would be that there's various food factors that can affect blood glucose response. The fat, protein, carbohydrate content of the meal. If there is no protein present and someone's eating, just carbohydrate, whether it's a bowl of pasta or the cornflakes with some non-fat milk, the carbohydrate from that particular meal will be digested and absorbed much more quickly than if the meal was a combination, in that protein takes about 2 hours to begin to digest, and amino acids will beginning to appear in the bloodstream. Fat can take up to 9 hours to completely digest, but carbohydrate, 20 minutes. Also, carbohydrate quality, whether the person's consuming a sugar or a starch, whether there's the presence of beta-glucan fiber. Beta-glucan fiber is a soluble fiber that's present in oatmeal, that's present in pectin and the peel of an apple. And what that does is it forms kind of a gel viscosity in the gut to help slow down glucose uptake. So it's a very helpful thing in trying to adjust specific foods in the diet to promote better blood glucose control. Cooking food affects glucose availability as well. For example, if you have a raw carrot, it tastes somewhat sweet. Cooked carrots will taste much sweeter. It's because the cooking process broke down the cell wall in the carrot, releasing more sugars. And so cooked carrots will also have a higher glycemic effect than would raw carrots. Puree versus whole food. If you're eating an apple as opposed to cooking the apple and making it into applesauce, even unsweetened applesauce will be absorbed more quickly and contribute to a faster postprandial glucose level than will eating the whole apple. Another thing that's important is to make sure that you're speaking the same language with your patient. Does your patient really understand you? I start out with my patients saying to them, when I say carbohydrate, what do you think of? I often find that they look puzzled. And I'll then say, well, when I say starches, what do you think of? And then they'll be able to list, I think of bread and potato and tortilla and spaghetti and everybody knows what sweets are. Patients often don't equate milk as being part of the carbohydrate group. And they're often surprised to learn that fruit is a carbohydrate, let alone juice. So it's important to make sure that you and your patient are on the same language page, so to speak. I usually describe carbohydrate as a large umbrella agency under which are many other types of carbohydrates, from milk products, fruits, starches, sweets. But carbohydrate really covers it all. Then we work on establishing a carbohydrate budget. That would be limit the amount of carbohydrate that's consumed meal to meal. Again, as I mentioned earlier, carbohydrate begins to raise blood glucose within 20 minutes of eating. So that piece of toast that you had this morning, within 20 minutes, some of that toast has become glucose molecules in the blood. And 90 to 100% of dietary carbohydrate enters the bloodstream as glucose within an hour. So the carbohydrate budget. I talk about kind of establishing almost like a checking account. And tell patients, well, you can spend a certain amount of carbohydrate at your meal. For women, it's about 45 grams per meal. For men, about 60 grams, even for some men, perhaps 75 grams per meal. Somewhere in that range would be the budget of how much carbohydrate you can eat at a meal. And for snacks, maybe 15 to 30 grams of carbohydrate as part of a snack. In fact, I even sometimes just say dollars, because when you say grams to people, they don't understand, like, how do you measure that? What are grams? But we're talking about a carbohydrate spending account and then say $45 and then switch back to grams. I find that patients really remember this. There's also some rules about the carbohydrate checking account. One, you have to be consistent. So for the most part, you're spending about the same amount of carbohydrate grams at each meal. You can't shift it or save it. You can't think, okay, I'm going to go to Hometown Buffet tonight. I'm not going to eat any carbohydrate all day long so I can have 180, 200 grams at dinner. It doesn't really work that way, I explain to patients. Essentially, your body is able to clean up about 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate at a meal, and if you eat a lot more than that, it's just going to spill over in your bloodstream and won't be able to get tucked into cells. So let's talk a little more about this carbohydrate budget, and how would one know what is 45 grams, what is 60 grams, what's 15 grams. This chart here gives you some ideas about carbohydrate portions that provide 15 grams of carbohydrate. So under starches, you can see a third of a cup of pasta, that would be cooked pasta, contains 15 grams of carbohydrate. Therefore, a cup of spaghetti would be 45 grams. Now, a cup of spaghetti is about the portion size of a woman's fist. And think about last time that you had a spaghetti dinner, how much spaghetti do you think you actually ate in your plate? Probably at least 2 cups, if not 3 cups. So you can see how the 45 grams times 3, and that would be way over one's carbohydrate budget. It's cooked pasta, this is cooked oatmeal, this is cooked rice. You see 1 ounce slice of bread, that would refer to like a regular pound sandwich loaf that's sliced into 16 slices. So a slice of sandwich bread is 15 grams. Half of an English muffin, 1 corn tortilla, 4 to 6 crackers. These are all 15-gram equivalents. In terms of fruits, an apple about the size of a tennis ball, 3/4 to a cup of any kind of berry would be about 15 grams. 1 cup of melon cubes, 1/4 cup of dried fruit, 15 grapes. Actually, a grape is about 1 gram of carbohydrate per grape. And 1/2 of a large banana would be 15 grams. So a whole banana would be 30. Milk, of course, is also a carbohydrate source. Actually, a cup of milk has about 12 grams of carbohydrate. So a cup of cooked rice, if 1/3 of a cup is 15, 3 times 1/3 is 1 full cup, or 3 times 15, 45 grams. 2 tacos, 2 corn tortillas, 2 times 15 grams per tortilla. So there's 30 grams of carbohydrate in 2 carne asada tacos, pretty popular here in Southern California. The carbohydrate is from the tortilla. The meat, the salsa, or lettuce has no carbohydrate that's significant enough to count. And then a sandwich with 2 slices of bread would be 30 grams. But again, you have to have the right operational definition. In your mind, you're picturing that sandwich on the left, and your patient might be defining sandwich as that sandwich on the right. There's a lot more carbohydrate there. I tell patients, you can make a large sandwich, like the Dagwood style almost, but you're going to keep it to just 2 sandwich bread, slices. 2 slices of bread would keep even a very large sandwich to 30 grams of carbohydrate. There are simple materials that you can use to help with 5-minute nutrition counseling for diabetes. I like the Healthy Plate. I think this is so useful. Here's an example. Here's the plate. Essentially, divide a circle in half. Half with a plate would be filled with vegetables, and the other half we're dividing in half again, and there would be a protein serving that would be about the size of the palm of one's hand. It would be somewhere around 3 to 4 ounces. A fist would be roughly a cup, to symbolize about a cup of whatever whole grain starch that would make up that particular meal, and then filling the other half of the plate with vegetables, whether it's stir-fried, cooked, raw, salad, or a little bit of both. If one is making menus, making meals this way, it really works for so many types of therapeutic nutrition plans. But I think it makes diabetes meal planning really, really easy and enjoyable. And yes, some people have a larger hand or a bigger fist. For the most part, I've never come across a woman with a fist that would be larger than let's say a cup and a half. Actually, there was one exception of this one woman and her husband. They both had their fists were about the size of cantaloupes, but that was one exception in my 20-something years of nutrition counseling. Okay, so let's look at more of these plates, the plate material. The government now, the U.S. Government has come out with myplate.gov to replace the pyramid. And I think this is very, very useful and helpful. You can go to the myplate.gov website and find lots of materials that you can use with your patients to help with that Healthy Plate counseling guidelines. If you look at this Healthy Plate, where the carbohydrate would be in the fruit, in the grains, and in dairy, and one would be able to more easily keep that to that 45 to 60 grams. Now you see dairy is a beverage here on myplate.gov. Here is the Healthy Eating Plate from Harvard School of Public Health. Take a look at this and see if you see any differences. You notice that the beverage is water. It's not milk. In fact, on this website, the Harvard School of Public Health Healthy Eating Plate actually stipulates to limit milk to 1 to 2 servings a day. Avoid sugary drinks. I like this because it has a lot of specifics and talks about even with vegetables that green vegetables would be the greater variety and better choice than potatoes or French fries. So let's look at some interpretations of this Healthy Plate. This looks pretty delicious to me. And here are, it's an asparagus chicken stir fry. And you can see in the back, there's just like, a small portion of rice. The rice is there, but the predominance is the bright green vegetable and the skinless lean chicken. Here's a vegetarian entree with black beans and a fresh salsa, some avocado. There's a nice garden salad in the background. And the carbohydrate component is the whole wheat tortilla, small one, which would provide maybe about 40 grams of carbohydrate as this particular meal. And here's a grilled salmon with a fresh salsa made with oranges, avocado, onion, and this looks quite delicious. and especially to me, I have not had lunch yet. But as you look at some of these um, images, you can see that we can make healthful foods taste good. Things can be nutritious and delicious. And when patients learn that there's so many foods that they can have, that the whole approach seems so much more positive rather than restrictive and punitive. Well, I couldn't show you foods and not hit on the cheeseburger. And being in Southern California, I don't know if those of you are familiar with our Southern California hamburger chain called In-N-Out Burger. It's extremely popular here. This is a picture of an In-N-Out cheeseburger, and because I often have residents ask me, well, shouldn't we just tell patients just not go to fast food? We got to get them not to go to those places. Well, I think you're going to be more successful if you instead help patients know how can they navigate those restaurants. And how can it be done? Well, the burger alone is not so much of a carbohydrate problem, really. You've got lettuce, onion, tomato, the pickle, the burger, the cheese. The carbohydrate comes into play from the two buns. So let's say it's 15 to 20 grams for the bottom bun, 15 to 20 for the top. At most, you have 40 grams of carbohydrate from the sandwich. The fries are a problem. The beverage is a problem. But if you can stick to the sandwich, not have any sides, and drink water or diet soda, then one can go to the In-N-Out Burger or whatever fast food place on occasion, not too frequently, but on occasion, and still keep one's glucose in a safe zone. An important part of 5-minute nutrition counseling utilizes images or visuals to reinforce learning. I think this is important to do and, again, saves you a lot of talking time. So you want to connect what the patient already knows with a new concept. For example, what foods have cholesterol? The answer: foods with a face. It takes a liver to produce cholesterol. So cholesterol is only going to be in an animal product. When a jar of peanut butter claims no cholesterol, it confuses patients and is misleading because the fact is peanuts never had cholesterol. Cholesterol is only from animal sources. What about saturated fat? What is saturated fat? Fat that's hard at room temperature, and saturated fat is one of the building blocks to creating human blood cholesterol. But saturated fat is a solid fat. I like to explain that it's like the fat frisbee that forms on the top of the beef stew you made when you put the pot in the refrigerator, and that fat congeals, and it congeals to a hard, opaque fat that you can lift off or crack. So we call it the solid fat frisbee that forms on the top of a soup or a stew. You can use these images to reinforce learning specifically with diabetes and the rather complex concept of how blood glucose rises. I like to use the model of cells, glucose in the blood, and insulin as a key. I explain to patients that we're made up of zillions and zillions of cells. And each of your cells needs to be fueled. Like a car needs gasoline, your cell needs fuel. And your cells run on glucose. And so when you eat carbohydrate foods, like the toasted bagel you had this morning, you chewed it up, digested it, it went into your stomach, went into the intestine, and eventually got absorbed into your bloodstream as little glucose molecules. These glucose molecules travel to all the cells of your body to provide fuel. And in order to do that, your pancreas will squirt out some insulin keys, and those insulin keys also travel through the bloodstream to get to that door of the cell, the receptor site, to open that door so glucose can leave your bloodstream and enter the cell. And when everything's working right, that's what happens. When things aren't quite working right and your blood sugars are higher, it often is because somehow that cell door didn't open. Maybe you didn't were able to squirt out enough insulin. Maybe with increasing body weight, some of that external body fat that you see in the mirror is also internal and is actually plugging up the doorways of some of those cells. And so if that's happening, if you're not making quite enough insulin, or your cells are not as sensitive to those keys as they used to be, and all the doors aren't opening up, then the glucose has nowhere to go but rises in the bloodstream, and your bloodstream is pretty much like a freeway system with rest stops along the way. So if you have a lot of glucose molecules that were not able to get into cells and traveling through your bloodstream around your body, they stop at places they're really never supposed to go to, like your eyes and your kidneys and your fingers and your toes, your feet. And that's how uncontrolled blood sugar really causes problems. Now, I also use this image to talk a little bit about medication function, that your metformin is helping to kind of scrub up the door lock so that and the hinges so that your receptor opens better, and your insulin that you're already making can work better. And this is why we call it a insulin sensitizer. And your glyburide, that's like bringing a new management company into your pancreas and getting the factory workers to step up the production of insulin. And so when I use these images, and I have handouts where I distribute these to patients, I see like light bulbs go off. Oh, that's why. That's why. Yes, that's why you can't take your metformin on sliding scale. That's why you need to really follow through with what your physician advised you to do. I think this is my favorite image. Most people are familiar with the famous I Love Lucy, the Lucy and Ethel episode in the Candy Factory. Well, another way to explain, glucose, what happens when you eat too much carbohydrate in a meal. I talk about Lucy and Ethel. Imagine them as insulin. Now it's Lucy and Ethel insulin. And the chocolates coming down the conveyor belt are glucose molecules. And when you just keep to your carbohydrate budget and eat no more than the 45 grams at a meal, Lucy and Ethel insulin can easily handle the glucose. They can, they're wrapping it up in those papers, putting it into the candy box, and everything's working well. But as soon as you had a large breakfast buffet, washing it down with a nice big glass of orange juice, well, that 140 grams of carbohydrate essentially is like when that manager said, "Let her roll, girls," and all of a sudden all these chocolates are coming by high speed, and Lucy and Ethel insulin cannot handle it, and you're seeing the glucose spilling over onto the floor. They're tucking it into their hats. They don't know what to do with it, and that's high blood sugar. Well, so I think we're moving on from talking about some of these images, and now let's talk a little bit about patients. Why are patients often not checking their blood sugars? I find that patients often tell me that their doctor doesn't look at their records, or they don't ask for the records when they worked at writing down these numbers. The patients say, "I don't know what to make of the numbers. My sugars are high no matter what I do, and my doctor doesn't look at them anyway." So it's very important when one has spent an amount of time, which is quite challenging to do. Just try to do that for yourself for 3 days. Keep a complete food diary and glucose record. When someone is doing that, we want to reward them and let them know that we appreciate their being a partner in their own health care, and look at those glucose records. So let's take a look at this. Here's a glucose record. You can see fastings on both days were elevated, 171, 187. 2-hour postprandials, they're all much higher than what we'd really like them to be. And what would you do with this information? Well, you might, looking at this, think maybe need to make some medication change. Maybe we need to increase the metformin, or perhaps they're already maxed out on metformin. You're looking at these elevated fastings and thinking, maybe we should start a little bit of Lantus at night. But now, let's look at the same glucose record and look at it if it were a food glucose record. Now you can see perhaps why some of these numbers are high. And then it turns out that the patient is snacking in the middle of the night, further contributing to their blood sugar being high in the morning because their morning numbers were actually not fastings. They were, maybe 4 hours after having a large glass of milk and some cereal. Now if we look at the same glucose record in terms of carbohydrate level, it forms a much clearer picture. And it turns out that even though, the tuna salad and apple and crackers, but that iced tea was Snapple iced tea. So there was 52 grams of carbohydrate in those iced teas. And the Chinese takeout was orange chicken, which I describe as essentially deep fried little mini chicken donuts in a sweet sauce. So it's not really chicken at all. It's mostly practically like a savory treat with a lot of carbohydrate. So please make sure that you look at those food glucose records and perhaps if your patient's not recording food, they should be for at least a few days so that you can observe patterns and they can observe patterns and help them get their glucose to a safe zone. Now, all the instruction that I do and teach our residents to do involves participation. The way that you are learning right now, listening to me lecturing, is not the finest way of achieving information and learning. The best learning really occurs when a learner is actively involved in the learning. If you think about it, how did you learn to ride a bike? If you just went to a lecture on bicycle riding, it wouldn't quite do it. You'd need to actually get on the bicycle, experience what it's like, and you can learn it. How did you learn to do specific medical procedures? You needed to have experience and model it and practice, and you got better and better. Well, you can do the same with nutrition counseling. And action-oriented diabetes diet counseling would be, for example, from a list of foods, you can have your patient circle foods on this list that would be of concern. Maybe you've made up a list of different types of carbohydrates. Some are, juices, whole grain bread, some different things, and they might circle foods of concern from this list. Or have your patient describe what a heart-healthy breakfast would be that also would be 45 grams of carbohydrate. Or ask the patient, how can you tweak last night's dinner to lower the carbs a bit? So you're doing these realistic practices and asking, what will you order differently next time you have lunch at McDonald's? What would you do differently? As you see on this list of participation, circling a food from a list is a lot simpler than describing a heart-healthy breakfast, which needs a little bit of more thought and understanding and creativity. So you can build these action-oriented practices to be simple or more complex, but definitely your patient will be able to function in their world of food when they leave your office if they've had a few moments of opportunity to be involved in the learning. I produce materials that we have available to all our residents here in the clinic. I call them Medi Diets, and I have developed these so that they can be participatory. There's opportunity in the materials to identify a food of concern or script out a menu idea, maybe where they can fill in what medications they are on and when they take them, or what they're eating too much of, what they're eating not enough of. And I find this very helpful to do. But you can also achieve some of this by keeping restaurant menus at your desk. or available. So if you have those paper restaurant menus, you can have patients look at breakfast suggestions and then actually circle or order what they would have that should keep their blood sugars under good control. I also think it's helpful just to keep a stack of those paper plates that are divided into 3 partitions. And the large partition would be for vegetables, the small partitions for starches and for protein. And that can be a handout that the patient could even write on there and go home with it. And it's a very powerful, very low-cost teaching tool. Now, medical nutrition therapy for diabetes management is indeed a process. We talked about the 5-minute nutrition counseling session, but a 1-hour medical nutrition therapy session that's conducted by a registered dietitian incorporates dietary evaluation and assessment. We do an education, skills, and ability assessment so the teaching is at the right level for the patient's needs. The patient-centered counseling is individualized, and we assess that patient's customary intake pattern. We look at the content of meals and snacks, evaluate possible barriers to change or barriers for them to adhere to the plan and help them overcome some of those barriers. And then we teach independent problem solving. Patients will often say, okay, but can I eat, whatever it is it okay if I have pizza? And then you want to say, well, what do you think? Let's take that apart. What's in the pizza? Maybe a smaller slice or 2 small slices, and then fill the other side of your plate with salad. Maybe choose the vegetable pizza so that it feels like there's more to crunch on and more to eat. Then, of course, evaluation is part of that 1-hour session. To find a registered dietitian in your area, you can go to eatright.org and go to what used to be called the American Dietetics Association. It changed its name 2 months ago and is now known as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. But the website's the same, eatright.org, and that will help you locate a registered dietitian in your area. But what about what's going on with your clinic right now? You can cultivate those resources within your own clinic to help do some nutrition counseling and help your patients achieve good diabetes management and glucose control. Your medical assistants can participate by asking the patients for their food glucose diary. That'll kind of make sure that the physicians will have that and look at it and ask the patient about it as well. Ask the patient, the medical assistants can ask the patient what brand of meter they're using and how often they test. They can provide diabetes education portfolios. We keep portfolios set up, pocket binders that have some of the materials I showed you, the picture, the lock and key model of glucose and cells, and some menu suggestions, and the healthy plate, and we give those out to patients. The medical assistants can be helpful with providing those to your patients, and maybe even opening up and going and showing them some of the helpful materials that are within the portfolio. And of course, medical assistants can teach diabetes nutrition survival skills. Diabetes nutrition survival skills would be 0-calorie beverages, healthy plate meals, eat less carbohydrate, and distribute the food blood glucose diary forms. So let's look at how we would reflection evaluation for today for you. Could you name 2 new nutrition counseling techniques that you will bring back to your practice? What are you going to have for breakfast tomorrow? And what simple materials can you start providing for your patients and involve your medical assistants in doing some of the teaching? Okay, well I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation, and I'm going to take any, questions.
Thank you, Cheryl, so much. I mean, that was so practical, and definitely I'm going to think about what I'm going to have for lunch. And as I repeated for those attendees, if you do have questions, you certainly can use the chat function at this point in time. Additionally, as I said, this webinar will be available on the Go Diabetes website, which is www.godiabetes.org, and that should be posted, that link, in about a week. As I look at my screen, I don't see any questions at this point in time, and I'm sure that's a reflection of how thorough Cheryl was in this presentation. So I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and your interest in this subject, and wish you a wonderful rest of the day. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.